What would you do if one day you accidentally came face to face with the person who once broke your heart, and beside her were 3 children who looked exactly like you? Ethan Montgomery, a self-made millionaire in New York. He's got it all: money, power, prestige. But the moment he sees her again, Naomi Carter, his ex-wife, standing in a small restaurant with 3 brown-skinned kids and bright gray-blue eyes, his entire world collapses. It's like staring into another life, a life he once walked away from. This isn't just coincidence. It's the past coming back, forcing him to face his own choices and the love he left behind. He once chose ambition over affection, success over family, pride over love. But now, as those 3 little faces call Naomi Mom, and her eyes meet his not with anger, but quiet sorrow, Ethan has to ask himself, maybe true happiness isn't about what we achieve, but what we've lost along the way. Would you have the courage to face the one you hurt and the version of yourself you ran away from? Join me on this journey, a story about love, redemption, and the kind of miracles that only happen when we learn to forgive. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance, like, share, and subscribe. And let's begin. Millionaire finds his black ex-wife at a restaurant with triplets who look just like him. It was the last evening of January. A cold wind swept down the streets of New York, carrying the metallic chill from the Hudson River. The yellow glow from the skyscrapers shimmered across the rain-soaked pavement like ribbons of silver. Ethan Montgomery stepped out of a black Lincoln, buttoning his charcoal gray coat. He'd just finished a meeting with the investment board, and dinner at Cedar on Fifth was meant to be nothing more than a small reward for a successful day. He had no idea tonight would change everything. Sometimes destiny only needs a single glance to turn a life upside down. The restaurant was warm, alive with laughter. Soft jazz played from a corner stage, and the air was thick with the scent of red wine and grilled steak. Ethan walked in with his business partner, phone still in hand, his mind tangled in the numbers from the day's reports. He chose a table by the window, his usual habit. He liked watching the city move, a reminder that the world kept spinning, even when he sat in the comfort of success. And then he saw her. A few tables away sat a woman with deep brown skin and soft curls tied low. A simple navy blue dress, straight shoulders, calm eyes, her voice steady, warm. When she smiled, time stopped. Every sound in the room seemed to fade. Naomi Carter. The name hit him like an old song. 10 years. 10 years since the day he lost her. Ethan's heart pounded. He looked again surely. It couldn't be. But when his eyes fell on the 3 small faces beside her, his hand froze on the wine glass. 3 children around 7 or 8. A boy and 2 girls, each with the same steel-gray eyes he saw every morning in the mirror. They laughed, carefree, innocent. One of them leaned toward their mother. "Mom, can I have dessert?" Naomi chuckled. "Finish your veggies first." "Honey," that voice gentle, certain made his chest ache. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd breathed. He just sat there, staring, a flood of buried memories tearing through him. The children's faces, the sharp chin, the straight nose, the spark in their eyes, they were his. "Ethan," his partner asked, snapping him out of his daze. "You all right, man?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just saw someone I used to know." But inside, the storm had already begun. He tried to focus on the conversation, but his gaze kept drifting back. Naomi looked happy, peaceful. She hadn't noticed him. She belonged to a world that didn't include him anymore. Part of him wanted to leave, but another part, the part that still carried her memory, kept him there. When the waiter came by, Ethan spoke quietly. "Send that bottle of wine to the lady over there. Tell her it's a good evening's wish from an old friend." The waiter nodded and carried the bottle over. Ethan watched. Naomi looked up, read the small card, and then her eyes found him, just for a second. But in that second, he saw it all: surprise, confusion, anger, and a sorrow too familiar to name. She set her glass down, stood, and walked toward him. The air in the restaurant seemed to tighten. "Ethan Montgomery." Her voice was low, steady. "Didn't expect to see you here." He rose, trying to smile, though his hands trembled. "Didn't expect to see you either. Naomi." For a heartbeat, the 10 years between them vanished. She was still the same strong, confident, radiant. 10 years, she said, meeting his gaze, "and you haven't changed. Still polite, still in control." He looked at her quietly. "You haven't changed either, except now you have 3 little companions." Naomi's eyes softened, then turned distant. She glanced toward the table, where 3 curious faces peeked their way. "Yes," she said softly, "life doesn't wait. Ethan, it moves on, whether you come back or not." He swallowed hard. 1,000 questions burned in his chest. Are they mine? Where have you been? Why didn't you tell me? But all he managed was one trembling line. "They're my children. Aren't they?" Naomi's gaze held his deep and unwavering. She smiled faintly, a mix of pain and grace. "Maybe you should ask your heart. Ethan, what does it tell you?" Then she turned, returning to the table. The children cheered when she came back, and Naomi bent down, kissing each one on the forehead. The golden light washed over them like a painting of peace. Ethan stood frozen, unsure what to feel. Emptiness, pain, and somewhere within it all, hope. He sat back down, gripping his glass. As the jazz played softly in the background, he knew one thing for certain. That night, his life had changed forever. That night, after leaving the restaurant. Ethan drove through the empty streets of Manhattan. The city still shimmered with light, but to him, everything felt veiled in mist. The sound of the engine blended with the winter wind hissing past the windows, a silence so heavy it almost hurt. 10 years, a whole decade since he'd last seen Naomi. At a red light, Ethan stopped the car. From the radio, "At Last" by Etta James began to play the same song that had once marked their first dance at a college party. Just a few notes were enough to pull him back through time, like a sudden tide. 10 years ago, they met at Columbia University Library. Naomi was a sociology major. Ethan studied economics. He remembered it vividly. She was sitting by the window, reading The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. Afternoon sunlight streamed in, illuminating her soft brown skin and those deep, thoughtful eyes. He didn't know what made him walk over curiosity, maybe, or something in her gaze that drew him in. "That one's a tough read," he said with a small smile. Naomi looked up, squinting slightly. "It is, but it's worth it. Have you read it?" "Not yet," he replied. "But if you recommend it, maybe I should." She laughed a light, springtime kind of laugh. From that day on, they kept running into each other at a small cafe near campus, on the quad, during long walks through Riverside Park. Ethan loved the way she talked about the world, honest, fierce, alive. Naomi loved how he listened quietly, deeply, as if every word mattered. Their love was simple, but it burned bright. He still remembered the first time he brought her home to the Montgomery estate in Westchester, despite the fine dining and the expensive wine. The air at the table was colder than the winter outside. His father, Richard Montgomery, set down his silverware and gave Naomi a polite, distant smile. "So, what do you do?" he asked. "I'm studying sociology," Naomi replied. "Ah," Richard nodded. "So studying people. Fascinating field, though not much practical value." Is there Ethan knew exactly what practical value meant. It meant money, status, legacy. It meant not Naomi. After dinner, his mother spoke softly, worry clouding her tone. "She's a good girl, Ethan, but you know how this world works. One day, you'll have to make a choice." He didn't answer. He loved Naomi, but deep down, fear whispered to him. Fear of losing his family. Fear of losing the perfect, polished image of a Montgomery success story. That year, Naomi graduated a semester early. She was offered a job in Boston, while Ethan was set to begin an internship at a major investment firm in New York. The day she left, they met at Grand Central Station. Naomi stood among the rush of travelers, a small suitcase by her side. She smiled, but her eyes glistened. "I don't want to leave, Ethan. But I can't stay, not if what we have is a secret." "It's not a secret," he said quietly. "I just need more time." "Time for what?" she asked softly. "To convince your parents, or to forget me?" He had no answer. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Am not asking you to choose me over your career. Am asking you to choose the truth over silence." The 7th of Triplets, train to Boston, pulled away. Ethan watched until she disappeared down the tracks. He didn't chase her. He didn't call out. He told himself he'd find her again once he was successful, once he had everything. But life doesn't wait. Years later, when Ethan became a millionaire, his name printed on Forbes, his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he realized success had only painted over the emptiness inside. He dated again short, shallow relationships that never lasted. No one saw him the way Naomi once did. Sometimes, he imagined she was still out there in another city, with someone else, but he never pictured this her, in a Manhattan restaurant, with 3 children who looked just like him. That night, Ethan parked by the river. He turned off the engine and stared at the city lights reflecting on the dark water. His breath fogged the glass. He thought of Naomi, her eyes, her voice, her words. "I just need you to choose the truth over silence." Ethan smiled faintly, a bitter, broken smile. Maybe the truth never really disappears. Maybe it just waits until you're brave enough to face it. He opened his phone and glanced at his calendar. Tomorrow's scheduled board meeting, investor call, business lunch, but he knew he wouldn't be at any of them. Tomorrow, he would find Naomi, because 10 years of silence was long enough. The next morning, a thin layer of fog hung over New York's sky. The city was already awake, horns, footsteps, voices, but to Ethan, it all sounded distant, like the world was speaking from behind glass. He drove aimlessly for almost an hour before finally stopping in front of a small brick house in Brooklyn, Naomi's home. It was luxurious, just red bricks, a rusted iron fence, a tiny porch with potted flowers. But to Ethan, it was beautiful. It was the place that held the years he had missed, the years she had spent alone, raising 3 children. He sat in the car for a long time, staring at the yellow chrysanthemums by the steps. A boy on a bike passed by, waving. "Morning." Mr. Ethan smiled faintly. "Morning," he replied, but his chest felt heavy. Finally, he took a deep breath and stepped out. When the door opened after his knock, Naomi stood there, simple clothes, hair tied back, no makeup. She looked surprised and cautious. "Ethan, I just want to talk," he said. his voice low, rough from a sleepless night. Naomi hesitated for a few seconds, then opened the door wider. 5 minutes. He stepped inside. The scent of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the faint aroma of old wood. The house was small but warm. Children's drawings covered the walls. On the table sat a framed photo, Naomi in the middle, her 3 kids around her, all smiling. Ethan stopped and stared at it silently. "You still love sunflowers." "Huh," he finally said, glancing toward the window. "I do," Naomi replied. "They always face the light, no matter how cloudy the sky." Silence filled the room again. Ethan clenched his fists, trying to hold himself together. "Naomi, last night, I didn't know what to say. I saw the kids, and what?" She interrupted, calm but sharp. "And I thought they might be mine." Her voice was steady. "And are you sure they aren't?" "I don't know," he whispered. "But when I looked at them, I felt like I was looking at myself." Naomi turned away, her expression unreadable. Some things, Ethan, don't need to be said. They only reopen wounds. He took a step closer, his voice cracked. "But I have to say it. I've been silent for too long." She gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "Silence, that's what you've always been best at." Ethan bowed his head. Memories crashed in that night in the rain. Her face blurred by tears and street lights, his legs frozen by fear and pride. "I was wrong, Naomi," he said, voice trembling. "Wrong for not standing up for you. Wrong for letting them define you by the color of your skin. And wrong for being too much of a coward to fight for us." Naomi's eyes hardened, but something inside them flickered a crack in the ice. "Why are you saying all this now?" "Ethan," she asked, "it's been 10 years. You lived in penthouses, flew across continents, signed deals worth millions, while I had to choose between food and winter coats for our kids that first year." Her voice shook on the last words, but she stood tall, proud, unbroken. Ethan couldn't respond. Every word she spoke cut deeper than the last. He looked around every piece of furniture, every drawing, every color in the house carried her touch. A small home yet alive, filled with warmth, something his $1,000,000 apartments had never known. "You built something I couldn't, Naomi," he said softly. "You built a family." She met his gaze. "A family that doesn't need you, Ethan." The words hit harder than any slap. He turned away, his eyes burning. "Do you know how many times I've regretted it?" he whispered. "I kept telling myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd make things right. But life doesn't hand out second chances." Naomi's voice softened, but only slightly. "Maybe not. But sometimes redemption doesn't come from regret. It comes from accepting what's lost." She walked toward the door, her tone calm, almost detached. "Your 5 minutes are up." Ethan didn't move. The morning light poured through the doorway, cutting her face in half in shadow, half in gold, just like their story, half love, half silence. He wanted to speak, to beg, but all that came out was Naomi. Sorry." She paused. "Sorry doesn't undo 10 years. Ethan." The door closed. The sound of the latch echoed like the end of a chapter. Ethan stepped outside. The cold wind slapped his face, sharp and sobering. Regret and longing crashed over him like waves. He felt small, a man who had everything, yet had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. He stood there for a long time, watching neighborhood kids play ball in the street. Their laughter carried him back to a summer afternoon long ago. Naomi laughing under the sun, saying, "You know, Ethan, happiness is really simple. Just being with someone you love, even if you have nothing else. That sentence, once a promise, now felt like a verdict. He returned to his car and sat there in silence. Pulling out his phone, he looked at an old article he'd saved a community feature about Naomi Carter, the woman who helped homeless children find homes. Back then, he'd thought, she's still the same, still chasing the light, no matter how hard the road. Now, he finally understood. That was what he loved about her, and why he could never forget her. He started the car, but didn't drive away. In the rearview mirror, Naomi's little brick house faded in the mist. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel and whispered, "No more silence." And for the first time in 10 years, he cried. A week had passed since the morning Ethan stood outside the little brick house in Brooklyn. He hadn't called, he hadn't written, but every day, his mind circled back there like a planet trapped in its orbit. Something about Naomi's words wouldn't let him go. A family that doesn't need you. It hurt, but it also woke him up. For the first time in 10 years, Ethan did something he'd forgotten how to do. He watched, he listened, and he waited. Saturday morning. He parked across from a small corner grocery that looked out onto the park. He wasn't stalking. He just wanted to see. Naomi arrived with the kids. She sat on a bench with a book, while the children ran wild on the grass. The boy fast and fearless, with his curls bouncing in the wind. The girls gentler, one always holding her mother's hand. Ethan didn't know their names, but every laugh, every tiny gesture carved itself into his memory. He memorized the scene, afraid that if he blinked, another 10 years would disappear. For the first time in a long while, he felt a kind of joy money could never buy. A gust of wind blew through. The youngest girl's balloon slipped from her hand and soared upward. She burst into tears. Naomi pulled her close, whispering comfort. Ethan almost stepped forward, then stopped himself. He just watched, smiling faintly through the noon sunlight. He knew he had no right to step in, but he also knew if redemption was possible, it would begin with small, quiet things. The next day, Ethan returned to the park. This time, he brought cookies and a few bright rubber balls. He waited until he saw them again. The boy noticed him first. "Hey, mister." "That's a cool ball," the boy shouted. Ethan knelt down, smiling. "You like it? I've got a few more if you want to share." The boy's eyes lit up. The two girls wandered over, curious. From a distance, Naomi noticed and froze, tension flashing across her face. Ethan stood, nodding politely a wordless hello. Naomi approached, her tone guarded. "What are you doing here, just passing by?" he said calmly. "Passing by 3 days in a row," Ethan hesitated. Then quietly, "I know I have no right to be here, but I just wanted to see them. Just see them. Naomi." Something in his voice stopped her. Gone was the pride, the control. What stood there now was a man stripped bare quiet, remorseful, real. The children laughed nearby. "Mom has funny," the boy yelled. "He said he can't play soccer because his shoes are too fancy." Naomi laughed a real, soft laugh, maybe the first he'd heard from her in a decade. She sighed. "Fine, but don't talk about the past. I promise," Ethan said. Days in the park. From then on, Ethan became the park friend. He brought paper boats, taught the boy to fold airplanes, shared candy and stories. No one knew who he really was, just Mr. Ethan, the man with the kind smile. Naomi kept her distance at first, but sometimes she sat nearby, silent, listening to the sound of their laughter. And slowly, Something inside her began to soften. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the trees, she asked quietly, "Why are you doing this, Ethan?" He looked at her, voice steady. "Because I owe them a childhood I wasn't there for. And you think a few toys and snacks will make up for that. No," he said simply, "but it's all I can do unless you let me do more." Naomi looked at him for a long time. The wind lifted a few strands of hair around her face. "You've changed," she murmured. "But Ethan, some wounds don't heal." "I'm not asking them to," he replied. "I just want you to know I'm still here." She said nothing, and in that silence, Ethan understood sometimes silence isn't rejection. Sometimes it's acceptance. The storm. A gray morning in early March. Ethan arrived at the park as usual, but rain began to fall, sudden and heavy. He grabbed an umbrella and drove toward Naomi's house, just to drop it off. When he got there, Naomi was rushing out, holding one of the girls, her face pale with panic. "Naomi, what happened?" "It's Noah," her voice trembled. "He collapsed at school. He's having trouble breathing. I need to get him to the hospital." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Give me the keys. I'll drive." The car sped through the downpour, wipers thrashing against the windshield. Naomi clutched her daughter tightly, eyes red and wet. Ethan gripped the wheel, heart pounding. Noah, the first name he'd learned, and for the first time in his life. Ethan found himself praying not for a deal, not for luck, but for a child. That night, the fluorescent lights of Brooklyn Hospital glowed against the rain-slick walls. Ethan sat outside the emergency room, hands clasped tightly. Inside, Naomi stood by her son's bed, tears streaming down her face. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing: this was the beginning of a new journey, one where he would have to face not just his past, but his fate. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed through the hospital room calm, relentless, each sound piercing Ethan's chest like a needle. He sat in the cold white hallway, eyes fixed on the small glass window. Inside, Naomi held Noah's hand. The boy lay motionless, his face pale, his chest rising faintly beneath the sheets. The two girls huddled together on the bench, the older one clutching a stuffed bear, red-eyed, the younger resting her head on her sister's shoulder. Silent. Ethan had never known fear like this, not the fear of losing money or status, but of losing something he never truly had: a family. The door opened. The doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask. "Your son has a cardiac disorder," he said quietly. "We'll need further tests to find a compatible marrow donor." Naomi nodded, her voice trembling. "He'll do whatever it takes." "Test me." Ethan stood up. "Test me too." Naomi turned, startled. "Ethan, you don't have to." "I have to," he said firmly. "If I can help, I will." Their eyes met no anger, no accusation, only pain and a flicker of hope. 3 days later. They sat in the consultation room. The doctor opened a folder, his voice calm but heavy. "The blood types don't match, and the DNA doesn't match either." The words fell like glass shattering. Ethan froze. The world went silent. He turned to Naomi. She was pale, trembling, her lips pressed tight. "Doesn't match," he whispered. "What do you mean?" The doctor hesitated. "I mean, you're not the boy's biological father." The room collapsed into silence. Ethan's hands began to shake. His breath came in uneven gasps. Noah's smile, his eyes, his laughter, all of it fractured like a broken mirror. He looked at Naomi, voice raw. "Naomi, is there something you want to tell me?" She looked down. A tear fell onto the table. "Ethan, please, go outside. Say it." "Naomi." His voice cracked, shaking. 10 years I've lived with regret, and now you're telling me they're not my children." Naomi looked up, her eyes wet and desperate. "You don't understand." "It's more complicated than you think." "Then make me understand." She steadied herself, breathing hard. "After you left, I lost everything. I couldn't go home. I had no one. Your brother, Michael, he came to see me. He helped me, paid the rent, stayed when the nights were longest." Her voice broke. "I don't even know what to call it, love or just survival. But then he died, a car accident, the next year. And when I found out I was pregnant, I thought about telling you. But then I saw the paper, your wedding announcement, and I knew I couldn't. The world tilted." Ethan stumbled back, barely breathing. "Michael," he whispered. "My brother." Naomi nodded, tears streaming. "Yes, the children are his." Ethan sank into the chair, staring at the floor. His heart pounded hollow in his chest. Michael, the man who had always protected him, who stood in front of every storm, had lived the life Ethan abandoned. But instead of anger, Ethan felt nothing. Just a hollow ache, deep, wordless, endless. "Did you ever hate me?" he asked quietly. Naomi wiped her tears, her voice fragile but calm. "Maybe in the beginning. But hate doesn't last. After a while, all I felt was pity, for both of us. I pitied you for not knowing what you lost, and I pitied myself for not being strong enough to hate you longer." Ethan gave a soft, broken laugh. "So I lost it all. My wife, my children, my brother." Naomi shook her head gently. "No, Ethan, you didn't lose them. You just never learned how to keep them here." She touched her chest. He looked at her. In her eyes, there was no fury, no bitterness, only weary kindness. That night, Ethan stood by the window at the end of the corridor, watching the rain streak down the glass. He thought of long dinners in the empty mansion of his youth, the sound of silverware echoing through silence. He thought of Michael the brother who once told him, "Don't let money make you forget why you started." Now those words came back, heavy as prophecy. He finally understood family wasn't about blood. It was about the heart that stayed. Even when the world didn't. Inside the room, Noah stirred. Naomi gasped softly, leaning over him. The boy blinked, weak but smiling. Ethan entered quietly, standing by the bed. "Uncle Ethan," Noah whispered. "You came." Ethan nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, I'm here." The boy hesitated, his voice small. "Mom said you're not really my dad. Is that true?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Ethan squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe not by blood," he said softly, "but I promise you I'll always be here. Always." Naomi watched him, her eyes softening not in forgiveness, but in recognition. He wasn't the same man she once knew. Days later, Noah's surgery went well. He woke weak but smiling, sunlight spilling across his face. Ethan sat outside, watching the girls asleep in the waiting chairs. For the first time in years, his heart felt fragile, but full. He was no longer the man of contracts and skyscrapers, just a man sitting in a hospital, praying for 3 children, the children of his brother, and the woman he'd once loved. As dawn broke, light streamed through the hospital window, bathing Naomi and Noah in a golden glow. Ethan whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I couldn't be your husband. I couldn't be their father. But I can be the man who makes sure they always know they are loved." And for the first time in 10 years, Ethan felt peace. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first rays of morning stretched across the city, as if life itself had finally forgiven him. Spring came slowly. The trees in Brooklyn Park began to shimmer with pale green buds, and the sky softened into a gentler blue. The hospital was now just a memory, a place of storms and sleepless nights. But for Ethan, it was where he had finally found himself again. Noah had grown stronger. Lily and Arya followed their brother everywhere like two small guardian angels. Naomi still kept her distance, but the chill between them had melted. She spoke less now, but smiled more. The gift one morning. Ethan arrived with a small wooden box in his hands. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, eyes glinting. "A treasure chest," Noah guessed, grinning. "Close," Ethan said, opening the lid. Inside were a few polished coins, some faded photographs, and an old silver watch. He lifted the watch carefully, running his thumb along its scratched surface. "This belonged to my brother to your father. It was passed down from our dad. And now, I want you to have it." Noah's eyes widened. "But why give it to me? Because it's yours by right," Ethan said softly. "And because I want you to know I'm proud of your father, and proud of you." From the doorway, Naomi stood frozen. Tears welled and spilled before she could stop them. In that moment, she knew Ethan had truly changed. He was no longer the man who once measured life by control and success. He was learning how to let go, how to love without asking for anything back. A new rhythm days turned into weeks. Ethan began visiting often not as a guest, but as part of the rhythm of their lives. He drove the children to school, helped with homework, taught them how to make tea and play piano. The little brick house was no longer just Naomi's home. It was filled with laughter again. One afternoon, Arya accidentally spilled milk all over his white shirt. Ethan only chuckled. "No one at my office would dare do that." Naomi smiled softly. "Then they're missing out." Ethan turned to her, eyes warm. Maybe I was missing out too. For a moment, silence fell between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peace. Some truths no longer needed to be spoken. The understanding. That evening, they walked together to the park. Ethan sat on the bench, watching the kids play in the golden wash of sunset. "Naomi," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about the past, about everything I did." "And what did you find?" she asked, eyes following her children. "That success means nothing if it leaves you alone, and that sometimes family isn't where you're born, it's where you choose to stay." Naomi smiled faintly. "You're right. Family is blood, it's love, and showing up." He looked at her, voice low. "I don't ask for forgiveness, just the chance to be here, with you, with them, to be someone they can believe in." Naomi's gaze softened. "Ethan, I never hated you forever. I just needed time to believe you'd really stay this time." The words settled between them like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan exhaled, feeling the weight lift from his chest. Dinner and new beginnings. That night, Ethan stayed for dinner the first time ever. The table was simple, a pot of stew, slices of toasted bread, yet to him, it was the finest meal he'd ever had. "Uncle Ethan," Lily asked between giggles, "do you have a family?" Ethan smiled, glancing at Naomi and the three children. "Yes," he said. "I'm sitting with them right now." The kids burst into laughter. Naomi lowered her head, smiling through the tremor of her lips. Michael's promise. A week later, Naomi received an invitation. The opening ceremony of Michael's Promise Foundation, established by Ethan Montgomery. Mission to support orphan children and single mothers in need. At the bottom of the card, a single line was written, because no one should have to fight alone. E.M. At the event near the Hudson River, Ethan stood at the podium, speaking slowly. Some losses teach us how to love. He said, some mistakes teach us humility. But the greatest gift is when those we've hurt still give us a chance to be better. He looked toward the front row at Naomi, Noah, Lily, and Arya. I know I'm lucky, he said, his voice breaking slightly, because I've been forgiven not in words, but in trust. The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was real. People weren't clapping for a speech. They were clapping for redemption. Epilogue. That night, by the river, the city lights shimmered like broken stars across the water. Naomi leaned on the railing, the wind tugging at her hair. Ethan stood beside her. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not walking away even when I didn't deserve to stay. Naomi smiled gently. No one's perfect, Ethan. But being willing to face your mistakes, that's what makes you worthy. He nodded, eyes on the skyline. I used to think redemption was getting back what I lost. Now I know it's creating something better from what remains. They stood there in silence, the moon rising over the Hudson, the light wrapping around them, both soft, forgiving. Ethan whispered, a promise more to himself than to her. We may not share blood, but it'll always protect them, because love doesn't need DNA. Naomi smiled, the kind of smile that carries both sorrow and peace. They couldn't return to the past. But together, slowly, gently, they could move forward. Summer morning sunlight slipped through the curtains, scattering gold across the wooden floor. Naomi's little house was alive with laughter. Noah and Lily were arguing over a coloring book. Arya sat on a chair, legs swinging, humming a soft tune. Ethan stood by the stove, awkwardly pouring milk into glasses. A small spill spread across the table. The children burst out laughing. Uncle Ethan, you said you're good at this. Well, I am just not at kitchen work, he said, chuckling as he wiped the milk. At the office. I have people for that. Naomi entered with a basket of fresh oranges. Not here you don't, she said, half teasing. In this house, whoever makes the mess cleans it. Ethan raised his hands in mock surrender. Yes, Mom. The Queen has spoken. The kitchen filled with laughter. For the first time in years, peace felt real. No meetings. No stock reports, no deadlines, only the scent of baked bread, citrus, and children's laughter swirling in the air. Coney Island. That afternoon, they drove to the beach. The sea lapped gently against the sand, wind tossing Naomi's hair as sunlight danced on the waves. Noah ran ahead, flying a shark-shaped kite. The girls chased after him, skirts fluttering. Ethan followed slowly, smiling at the sight. He'd never imagined he'd end up here on a quiet beach, surrounded by 3 children who shared no blood with him, yet somehow carried his heart. Naomi walked beside him, sandals in hand. Do you remember the first time we went to the beach? She asked. Ethan nodded, smiling. Cape Cod. I was glued to my laptop. You didn't talk to me for 2 days. Naomi laughed. I wasn't angry because of that. I was angry because you never looked around. All the beauty was right in front of you, and you missed it. Ethan's smile softened. He understood now every word of it. Thank you, Naomi, he said quietly, for letting me see it this time. She didn't reply, just smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the sea, the sandcastle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in amber and rose, Noah tugged at Ethan's hand. "Uncle Ethan, let's build a sandcastle." "A castle." "Sure. But we need a king and queen," he teased, and Princesses Arya squealed, "and a knight to protect them," Lily added. Ethan laughed, kneeling beside them. Together they built walls, towers, tiny gates, a kingdom made of laughter and warm sand. Naomi watched from a short distance, her smile glowing with quiet joy. A breeze swept by, scattering grains of sand into the air. Noah looked up. "Uncle Ethan, do you think this castle is real?" Ethan smiled. "Yes, it is, because it's built with love." Naomi looked at him, and in that glance, she knew he wasn't the same man from years ago. He hadn't changed to win her back, but to become someone better. The fire and the stars night fell. They sat around a small fire near the shore, the waves whispering in the distance. Naomi told a fairy tale, her voice soft and melodic. The children leaned on one another, drifting to sleep. Ethan watched the firelight dance in her eyes. "I used to think love was something you had to hold tight," he said quietly. "But now I know sometimes love means letting things be." Naomi turned to him. "I used to think forgiveness was weakness, but maybe it's the only way to free yourself." They both looked out toward the horizon where the moonlight met the sea. No more words were needed. The silence between them was complete and whole. Michael's Promise. A month later, Ethan brought them to visit Michael's Promise Foundation. The nameplate gleamed in the afternoon sun above the white building. Noah squeezed his hand. "Uncle Ethan," whose Michael Ethan smiled softly. "He was a good man, and he's the reason I'm here today." The boy grinned. "Then I thank Mr. Michael, too." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Me too. Kiddo, me too." From behind. Naomi watched them and her heart swelled. Ethan didn't need a title. He didn't need to prove anything. Just being there was enough. Love, she realized, could outlast time and even blood. Home. That night, after tucking the children into bed, Naomi stepped onto the porch. Ethan sat on the steps, gazing up at a sky full of stars. "You know," he said softly, "if someone asked me what the most precious thing I've ever had was, I'd say today." Naomi sat beside him. "Why today?" "Because today I have a family. Not perfect, not complete, but mine." She leaned her head against his shoulder. In the quiet, they could hear the distant waves, the wind through the trees, and the slow, steady breathing of 3 sleeping children inside. Everything was ordinary, and that ordinary peace was what they had searched for all along. Epilogue. At dawn, Ethan woke early. He wrote a few lines in his notebook and left it on the kitchen table. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for letting me call this place home. Ethan." When Naomi found it, she smiled. Outside, morning light spilled into the small house. The children's laughter echoed through the yard. Ethan turned back toward them, arms open wide. A simple morning, but for them, it was the beginning of a new life. 3 years later, the New York sky was unusually blue. On the top floor of Montgomery & Co., soft morning wind drifted through the wide glass windows, carrying the faint scent of coffee. Ethan stood before the skyline, watching the traffic flow like veins of light through the city. It moved as fast as it always had, but now he no longer felt he belonged to its rhythm. On his desk sat a wooden photo frame Naomi, the 3 children, and him all laughing on a sunlit beach. A young assistant appeared at the door. "Mr. Montgomery, the investment board meeting is ready." Ethan turned, smiling. "Postpone it till this afternoon. I've got an important class to attend. The assistant blinked. A class? Sir. Yeah, Ethan said, adjusting his cuffs. My daughter's art class. I'm the model today. The young man grinned, understanding, and quietly left. The art class that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows of a small studio. Arya sat at her easel, brows furrowed in concentration. Uncle Ethan, don't smile. I'm not done yet. Sorry, Princess can't help it. Lily was coloring a seascape beside her. Noah read a book nearby. Naomi stood at the door, watching them with quiet tenderness. The room was simple, just a few paintings, a vase of sunflowers, but it felt fuller than any penthouse Ethan had ever known. When the class ended, they went out for dinner together, a small riverside restaurant where warm lights shimmered on the water. Noah told stories from school. Lily proudly showed her test scores. Arya laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. Ethan listened, smiling, a fullness blooming in his chest. He no longer thought about what he'd lost, only about what he'd been given. Naomi noticed his silence. Still the same habit? She teased softly. Listening instead of talking. He chuckled. I've learned that sometimes silence is the most beautiful way to listen. She poured a little more wine into his glass, and also the way of people who've learned peace. Ethan raised his glass. Maybe peace is something we find out there somewhere. Maybe it's what we return to once we stop running from it. Their glasses clinked gently. The rain and the truth. Later that night, after tucking the children into bed, they sat on the porch. A fine rain fell, soft and steady, carrying the scent of earth. Do you ever wonder, Ethan asked, what your life would have been like if that night, the night I walked into that restaurant, never happened? Naomi watched the rain fall. Maybe I'd still be fine, she said slowly, but I'd never know what forgiveness feels like. Her answer silenced him for a moment. Then he whispered, I used to think money could fix everything, but now I know only love can do that. Naomi reached over and touched his hand. You've already done enough. Ethan, you don't have to try any more. He smiled, and for the first time, felt no weight left in his heart, not filled by success, but by presence.
Michael's legacy. A year later, Michael's Promise Foundation had expanded across multiple states. Hundreds of children were supported. Dozens of single mothers found hope again. On the main wall hung a simple inscription, "No one was born to fight alone." At the opening of the new branch in Atlanta, Ethan and Naomi cut the ribbon together. When reporters asked about his motivation, Ethan smiled. There are debts you can't repay with money, only by living better every day. Applause followed. Naomi said nothing, just looked at him, eyes bright with pride and quiet emotion. A winter reflection. That night, in their Brooklyn home, Ethan sat at his desk writing. His voice murmured as he read the words aloud. Once, I was afraid of being alone. Now I know loneliness isn't scary. What's scary is not knowing who you belong to. I chased success so long, I forgot to ask who'd be there to share it. Today, when I see Naomi smile and hear the children call me Uncle Ethan, I know I've found my answer. He closed the journal, turned off the lamp, and walked into the living room. Naomi had fallen asleep on the couch, the reading light casting a soft glow on her face. He gently draped a blanket over her shoulders, then sat down beside the window. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall soft, weightless flakes covering rooftops and streets, as if the city itself were being washed clean. Ethan whispered, barely above a breath,
If one day people are measured by something, I hope it is wealth but kindness. Naomi stirred, opening her eyes, smiling drowsily. Still the philosopher. Huh, maybe, he said softly, but only because I finally have a reason to slow down. She took his hand, eyes warm. We've gone in such a big circle just to find the smallest things. Ethan smiled. And it's those small things, he said, that make everything. Outside, snow continued to fall. In the soft glow of the lamp, the framed family photo gleamed a man, a woman, and 3 laughing children. No grand titles, no bloodlines, only love simple, whole, and true. And the story closed, like a deep, contented breath. No one is born to be perfect, but everyone can choose to love. In this life, we all make mistakes. We all have regrets. And there are things we can never go back to. But the most beautiful part of life is that we never fall. It's that we find the courage to stand again, to love again. Ethan once believed happiness meant having more money, more power, more control. But standing inside that little house, surrounded by laughter and warmth, he finally realized true happiness is simply being with the ones who make your heart feel at home. His story and Naomi's isn't just about love. It's a quiet reminder that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace. Love isn't about owning. It's about showing up. So if you're holding on to sadness, a regret, or an unfinished chapter in your heart, believe me, it's never too late to say I'm sorry or thank you. Because sometimes, just one word is enough to start an entire new life. Thank you for listening to this story. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, like, share, and subscribe, so we can keep spreading stories that touch the heart and remind us all that love is never truly gone.